Story 1. Once, a woman called my office trying to return a weapon to the military. Apparently, she was the weapon. Story 2. Way back in the 80s, while I was still in elementary school, there was a kid who every day swore he was a ninja. He could not show us any of his moves or weapons because his sensei had forbidden him. That did not stop him from making outlandish claims, like the nunchaku and throwing stars he had hidden in his backpack or how he had fought and killed an entire gang. One day he claimed he could spin so fast he would turn invisible. Several classmates demanded he prove it during free time, and for whatever reason he finally relented. He started spinning in circles, but we could still see him. He kept spinning until he threw up. Story 3. My friend thought he was Deadpool and had superpowers. He once fell off his bike and broke his arm. He thought it would heal immediately, so he refused to go to the hospital. He now has a very crooked arm. Story 4. She occasionally cheated on her boyfriend but claimed it was not cheating because she only did it during full moons, when her werewolf half was responsible. Story 5. A girl at my school, let's call her Emma, believed she came from a different planet where horses were gods. Emma convinced my friend and many others that a sheep told her she was from a magical planet and that she had to worship horses. We were around 11 or 12 at the time, and I could not believe my friend believed her. Emma told everyone she could speak to horses and that they would one day take over the world and we would all turn into horse people. She used to write letters, send emails, and make fake phone calls from her home planet. If anyone questioned her or said she was a normal human rather than a human-horse hybrid, she would cry hysterically and hold a serious grudge. She hated me. Her friendship group all wore matching bracelets, sang songs about horses, and drew pictures of them. This went on until we were about 14. I am pretty sure she would make a great cult leader, as she managed to convince so many people. Story 6. My ex-boyfriend was certain he was a vampire. He kept going to churches and cemeteries. I failed to bring him back to reality. He died of cancer in January this year. Story 7. My best friend in high school and during my first 2 years of college genuinely believed she could speak to the forest and that she was a wingless fairy. When we took her dogs for walks, she would lean against trees and tell me what the rustling of the leaves meant. She would also fill her notebooks with what she called new alchemy, drawing violent circles and vague shapes she believed contained magical and fey power. We had a falling out a few years later when she moved to the other side of the country to be with her grandmother. We started talking again a few months ago and I learned she had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. She is now on 2 medications, and she told me her walks are depressingly quiet. Story 8. They experienced severe childhood abuse and trauma and coped by believing they were psychic. We met in junior high when they still believed that. They were not entirely wrong, just somewhat misdirected. They are a deeply empathic person who, because of their abuse history, is very good at reading facial expressions and body language. They became a social worker and a volunteer at a domestic violence shelter, where the same qualities that made them think they were psychic make them excellent at helping others through difficult times. Story 9. This is not exactly what you are asking for, but it is similar. From 1st to 6th grade, I had a friend named Ally who genuinely believed she could see dead people and demons. She would do stereotypical vampire things, pretending to bite people, showing off her canines and talking about blood, but that was not her main thing. She had one demon that she said followed her everywhere and hid in the bathrooms, which we called it. Ally always described it as being whiter than paper with 2 slits for a nose and sharp fangs. I wholeheartedly believed her because I was a kid who wanted supernatural things to be real, and she was my best friend with no reason to lie. I was too scared to use the restroom at school because she said it always peeked over the stall. As the years went on, I eventually realized she was making it up. The conviction with which she said those things was frightening. I know her parents were going through a rough patch at the time, so I think she was making it up for attention, which she got. I have not talked to Ally in a while, but another friend ran into her at a fair recently and said she seemed to be doing well. I am glad things are better for her. Story 10. I met a man who was supposedly close to the Scientology level at which practitioners are supposed to develop abilities such as telepathy. I am not sure what became of him. You would think that once people reached this level and did not have these abilities they would leave, but they did not because of brainwashing. Story 11. One of my closest friends, whom I lived with through most of college, thought she had special powers. It was weird, to say the least. She had been bullied all her life, and I always thought she developed this as a coping mechanism. What really stood out was how good she was at getting people to play along, and I had no idea how. The general scenario was this: if she really liked someone, after a while she would tell me in a knowing way that she thought they had the gift, also known as having powers. She once told me she thought I had them. I just smiled, nodded, and said, "Okie dokie then." Then she would meet that person for lunch and launch into a full spiel about how she was all that stood between the world and destruction. She would say she could tell they were special too, and that she needed someone to help her fight these battles. Not literal fights, but astral projection type battles, and help her guard the gates. A side note: the gates were colored cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. She got mad at me once when I referred to them as the printer gates. You would think people would run screaming after hearing all that. But they didn't. They would come to our apartment and talk about these battles. All I can figure is she was good at spotting people with overactive imaginations who did not fit in well. She probably would have made a great cult leader. She now works in information technology, and we still talk regularly. She wrote a fantasy novel she is trying to get published, which was actually quite good when she let me read the draft. I guess that became the outlet for her stories as she grew up. I want to ask her what was going on, but I do not want to open that can of worms again. When she was not in full-on strange mode, she was the kindest and most genuinely fun person to be around. I am a little afraid the printer gates will rear their ugly head again if I bring it up. Edit. For those who assume people went along with it because she was attractive, I will leave it at this: the bullying she had experienced was about her physical appearance and weight. I think the appeal is more like what one reply suggested in an unfortunate parallel to Charles Manson. She was good at spotting people cast off by others, and then you feel excited to belong to something, so you go along with it. Story 12. Not exactly the same as Otherkin, but very much in the vein of total reality denial. I know someone who wholeheartedly believes he is a Jedi Master. Our families go way back, so I know he was mercilessly bullied throughout his childhood. He has always had problems, one of those people who seem not quite right, but you cannot say why. He decided he was a Jedi one day out of the blue. Credit where credit is due, he went all the way with it and became a minor nerd celebrity for a while. At first, when people challenged the Jedi claim by asking why he did not have powers, he would say that being a Jedi is a mindset, not a power, or he would joke that people did not know the powers he might have. He was completely serious. If you pushed him, he would melt down with tears and screaming. Apparently his parents supported him financially until he married and had a child while still insisting he was a Jedi. After that, his wife supported him. Eventually, he left his family to run off with a teenager he met at a convention. That is when we cut ties with him. You can believe you are a Jedi, but abandoning your child is Sith Lord behavior. Editor note: he was in his mid-20s when he went Jedi. There are more people who identify as Jedi than I expected. Postscript: I avoided identifying information. I am not providing it because his ex-wife and child deserve to move on. If you think you know this man, I am sorry that I cannot confirm it and that you might know him. Story 13. My cousin completely believed she was a werewolf. She was finally diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder years ago. She is doing a lot better now. Story 14. When I was in the United States Navy, we had a sailor who believed he was a wolf in a human body. He would howl at the moon and was generally strange. I knew someone who had served with him before me at a different command. They said he had to be forced by medical personnel to shower. When asked why he would not shower, he said it would wash away his scent and he would not be able to attract a mate. I do not know what happened to him. This was aboard the aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt in 2007. I know he was also on a carrier in Florida. I am fairly confident he was a conventional machinist's mate. Story 15. I had a friend who believed she was a vampire and often tried to bite my wrists and neck. It got to the point where she brought pig's blood to school and openly drank it from a cup as if it were juice. 2 days later, I visited her in a psychiatric hospital. Story 16. Someone I used to be friends with identified as a lynx. I was uncomfortable, but she was my friend, so I dealt with it. Soon she began saying I was sitting on her tail and was convinced she turned into a cat at night. The last I heard, she was drawing furry pornography for $100 each. Many people note Link's tails are short. I know that. She was delusional, and I was sitting a desk away when she made the accusation. She once claimed she was sorry because she had accidentally clawed me, even though she had only placed her hand on my shoulder. She also complained that the teacher's talking hurt her ears and affected her supposed cat hearing. Another time she tried to go a week without glasses to prove her eyes were becoming more like a cat's. She did not last an hour. Finally, she attempted to start a furry-thurian club. Her campaign line was "Join our cult to unleash your inner animal." She actually used the word cult. Story 17. I knew a guy who insisted he was a reincarnated kitsune. We argued once and he vowed to destroy my life because, he said, kitsune never let go of grudges. Mythologically, kitsune are described as capricious. He ended up telling lies about me to everyone he could, gaslighting another friend into cutting off contact, and I still occasionally run into someone online who fell for one of his many stories about me. Edit. It seems fewer people know the word capricious than I thought. A better word here might be carefree. I meant that he had completely misunderstood the personality trait. Story 18. I went to school with a girl who acted like a dog. She barked, panted, and pawed at people. In class, she would reply normally but then bark at the end. This went on for 3 years. I decided to look her up on Facebook, and she has a good job and seems normal. Teenagers are fucking weird. Story 19. Years before goths and New Age enlightenment, I managed an occult bookstore and met wannabe vampires, werewolves, fairies, and others. Sometimes it felt like running a Dark Shadows convention. I dated one of the patrons of the store, a 6-foot Amazon from Texas who claimed to be a vampire. She was not too crazy, but toward the end of the relationship she became too bitey. Story 20. Sorry, I can't help with content that describes sexual activity with animals. Yes, unfortunately. He claimed to have an invisible tail and said he dreamed that a great mother wolf told him he had the soul of a wolf. He began buying fur garments. He showed me eBay links via Facebook and said that's one of the only ways he can become aroused. He also said he behaved inappropriately toward animals. Last I heard, he's in Alaska working with sled dogs while engaged to a woman he refuses to be intimate with because he finds human sex repulsive. I need a drink just writing that. Story 21. When I was a kid, my classmates seemed to think I believed I was a Power Ranger. I wore morphers constantly. It was my favorite show on television and I was obsessed. I sometimes pretended to be a Power Ranger in play, but I knew I was not. I kept the morpher with me because I felt so alone and needed something. I was treated badly at home, school was just as bad, and I was incredibly anxious. I would vomit every morning before school. Being that anxious all the time was awful. I just wished the Rangers would come and rescue me. That is why the morpher stayed with me. I was 9 or 10 years old, and looking back, I know it was the only reason I am still here. I enjoyed the show until I was 13 because it grew up with me. I kept it quiet. After I turned 11, the morphers stayed hidden in my backpack. Somehow, because of my mother, everyone knew I still watched it. Even after I stopped, people still believed I was obsessed. They were not completely wrong, but I kept it hidden. I do not know why it was such an issue. Everyone seemed to think I truly believed I was a Power Ranger. That even followed me to university when one guy from my school brought it up. He shut up quickly when I asked why he was bringing it here. I had never spoken to him before and had nothing to do with him. He kept his distance after that. I never thought I was a Power Ranger. I just enjoyed the show and imagined what it would be like to be one. Mostly I imagined having a group of friends to hang out with and talk to. Fighting monsters rarely entered my mind. I was an incredibly lonely and scared child who latched onto something as a coping mechanism. Thanks for the awards. I really appreciate it. If you want to spend money on this post, please consider donating to Monkey World, the charity I love. They have an online wish list and a donation page. I would love to see us do something good for a cause I care about. Story 22. When I was at university, one of my housemates had a friend come over and hang out with us one night. At the time, we were all into tabletop role-playing games, so when I started talking to him and he said he was a half-angel, half-demon, and a demon hunter, I didn't bat an eye. I replied that I was a telekinetic spirit medium, and we chatted for about 10 minutes before I realized he was not talking about role-playing games. I have to admit that when I figured it out, I was not diplomatic, not aggressive, just blunt. I may have laughed. Story 23. One of my middle school teacher's children believed he could talk to bees, but he soon learned he could not. I do not remember whether he found out if he was allergic to bees. Story 24. When I was a kid, there was an odd girl at my church. She and I were the same age and grew up together, so we were friends by default. She was nice, and I did not mind hanging out with her. I thought she had a wild imagination, and one time she told me she was a witch and her little brother was a warlock. But she said she did not know about her younger siblings because they were too young for magic. I just said cool and let her tell me a little about it. Then we started talking about boys in school. When we were 12, we started going to our church summer camp for girls called Girls Camp, and she would hardly ever leave her cot. Everyone already thought she was weird, so they just left her alone. Even when I asked her about it, she said she did not feel well. In our second year at Girls Camp, we went to a state park far from home, and the group from our town was large enough that we needed 2 cabins. The older girls took one cabin and the first and second years took the other. One day around lunchtime, I came back from the mess hall, and a lot of the older girls were in our cabin talking to the girl who claimed to be a witch. Apparently, while they were doing the bored teen at camp thing of yelling into a box fan to change their voices, they woke her up and made her angry, so she screamed out the window that she would hex them if they did not stop. Now the older girls were there to test her abilities as a witch. They approached it civilly but tried hard not to laugh or criticize her while it played out. One of the mean girls asked what she could do. The girl who claimed to be a witch said she could make people do things. The mean girl told her to show them and to make her do something. They staged a show. The girl who claimed to be a witch stood at one end of the cabin and everyone else stood between her and the girl who had challenged her at the other end. She closed her eyes, concentrated, and told another mean girl she would make the challenger look at a specific person nearby, who happened to be the challenger's cousin. The other mean girl went to check and immediately exclaimed that it had worked. The challenger had not done anything at all, but the group decided to convince the witch that she had succeeded so they could antagonize her about more of her supposed abilities. Each time she showed them something new, they pretended it worked and started treating her like a mascot for the rest of camp. Because of these events, the girls from church relentlessly made fun of her at every opportunity about her supposed powers. She ended up going to therapy and being an introverted shut-in for years. In her senior year, she started attending public school, and I got to see her more again. Summary: she told me she had lied to the therapist about stopping her magical practices to appease her parents, and that pretending to stop had cursed her and caused a physical disability she developed. She said that now that she was preparing to graduate, she would move out, get better, and help people with her magic. That was 10 years ago. Story 25. One time I met a man while playing online games. He always claimed he was a god, and at first I thought it was a joke. When we met in person, he truly believed it and said there are other gods on Earth that we do not know about. I asked for proof like teleportation, but he said that would not work because the human brain could not understand it and my head would explode. He also said he was several hundred years old. It was a little funny because after coffee he asked if I could drive him to the train station. Why would a god not have a car? The next day I had a terrible headache. I told him, and he said it was his doing because I did not believe he was a god. I blocked him. Story 26. Did I know him? I am him. Between the ages of 5 and 10, I was convinced I was a Jedi. I told everyone, and my parents eventually confronted me. They assumed it was a phase and I would grow out of it. But 5 years passed and nothing changed. I eventually realized they were right. I refused to accept it at first, but when I did, I cried myself to sleep for about 3 months. Update: I now cry myself to sleep less often. I also no longer feel the need to try to move things with my mind. Story 27. Buckle the fuck up, everyone. I was that kid in middle school. I wholeheartedly believed I was a forest elf. I do not even really remember how it started, but I always loved fantasy novels growing up. especially ones about mythical creatures, nymphs, and fairies. In middle school, I wore a lot of earthy colors, always had flowers in my hair, joined the archery club, which I was not good at, wore elf ears to school, and mostly walked around barefoot, though not at school. I thought I would communicate with forest animals and navigate using only the trees and any water source. Needless to say, I was picked on a lot. I am 26 now, an information technology consultant, married to a great guy, and I have a baby girl on the way. I never picked up archery again, I promise. Edit. I am dying at some of these comments. Thank you all for your humor and for the silver. I am definitely thinking about trying archery seriously. But with a baby on the way, it does not seem possible right now. Maybe I will raise a family of elves and take it up with my husband when my daughter is old enough. And there is the gold. I guess I am going back to archery, fellas. Story 28. Command, roof, squash, decide, party, air, melodic, crush, profit, dazzling. Story 29. Yes. Many people in New Orleans think they are vampires. Several of them drink blood. I asked how old he was. He said he was 473 years old. He is a very successful vampire tour guide. Story 30. Dude thought he was a vampire. I caught him. We briefly had sex right at the beginning of that belief when he defended biting the skin on my neck by saying it was natural. That ended the sexual relationship and my neck hurt for a while. He spent several years with a group engaging in blood drinking and bloodletting into vials for injections. What happened to him? He had to stop when he was deployed to Iraq. He remained odd, but the vampirism ceased. He also had a lot of personal drama and ended up marrying a woman with a fatal condition in the hospital right before she died. We lost contact at some point because his novelty entertainment was not worth putting up with his narcissism and weirdness. Story 31. From about 6 to 12, my daughter was convinced she was a wolf and believed that if she went into the woods and found a pack, she could talk to them and they would not try to eat her. She practiced howling a lot. You could not change her mind. Story 32. I knew a man who believed he was Jesus Christ. He was a very kind, gentle person. We were both in our early to mid-20s, and I was dating his best friend. He did not talk about it to everyone. He had to really trust you. Eventually, he decided I was a good enough friend to open up, so we had a long conversation. Much of his story was that he woke up one morning at the age of 10, but the night and the dreams had lasted 30 years. He said he had lived every moment of that life until about 40, then woke up and it was all a dream, and his life then played out exactly as it had in the 30-year dream. He told me he knew ahead of time that he would meet me and when World War III would start and what would happen, but he said he was not allowed to tell me the details. The most important part, he said, was that he was the second coming of Jesus and destined to save the world, although he could not be more specific. He was completely serious and very lucid when he spoke, and you would never have guessed he was carrying that burden. The relationship with his friend did not last, though we remained friendly for a while, and eventually we lost touch. Later I saw John on the side of the road, and I stopped to talk. It was depressing. I think his delusions had caught up with him. He looked like a shell of his former self. He had lost about 40 pounds and had a colostomy bag after heavy drug use. It was quite sad, and I sometimes wonder whether he had foreseen that in his dream, although I doubt it. Story 33. I had a friend who believed in a religion created for an anime. She believed, and I hope this is past tense because I have not spoken to her in 4 years, in the religion from Naruto, the one followed by Haydn. I think it was called Jashinism. She regarded Haydn as a prophet and tried to emulate him. She cut herself to sacrifice some of her blood, ate meat rare because she believed that was the only acceptable way, and asked people she felt close to if they would be willing to sacrifice their blood. When I last spoke to her, she was 21 and still believed in it. She had believed so since she was 16. I think she was a deeply troubled young woman trying to find herself, but I do not understand what believing in a fictional religion would give anyone. Story 34. There was a guy in my high school who thought he was a Russian sleeper agent. I do not know if he had just read some Cold War novel or what, but he would sometimes speak with a painfully bad Russian accent. He acted like it slipped out, which was kind of funny. He would sometimes stop mid-conversation, hold his hand up to his ear as if he had an earpiece, listen, then say something like, "I have been activated, I have to go," and dash off. There was a girl at our school who spoke some Russian. I think her mother was Russian. Occasionally she would say something to him and he would play along and speak nonsense. We felt sorry for him because he wanted to be cool. Acting like a Russian sleeper agent was not the way to go. Story 35. I met a girl at camp who believed she was a cat and had an invisible tiger boyfriend. Her foster parents had sent her when she heard about the camp. She seemed unsure about them, but I thought it was important to her. Now I realize it was probably a coping mechanism for all she had gone through. We were both lonely. She did not know many people and I was a social outcast, but we had a lot of fun that week. I never saw her again. I hope she was placed with a good family and eventually no longer needed that coping mechanism. She definitely enjoyed exploring outside. Story 36. Had this guy in my shop. No idea how he made it through basic training, but he absolutely believed he was a werewolf. We were deployed and working the night shift on the flight deck of a landing helicopter dock, and the desk sergeant told him to do a job on one of the aircraft. He flat out refused, saying it was a full moon and he would turn into a wolf if he went outside. In true flight deck fashion, a few of us dragged him outside. He was kicking, snarling, howling, and growling, and when we got to the flight deck, he began wrenching and making strange screeching noises as if he thought he was transforming into a wolf. He said, "You don't want to be around for this. I get very violent when I'm a wolf." Then he jumped and ran around on all fours, acting like a werewolf. We were all laughing our asses off. We knew he was odd before deployment, but no one knew how odd, and we certainly weren't prepared for that. He was also the smelly guy in the shop, so we torque-striped his body wash bottle to see if he was using it. He would strip down and go to the showers in a towel and shower shoes, but he would stand there and not turn the water on or just wet his hair to make it look like he had showered. After 2 weeks with the torque stripe still intact and him stinking to high heaven, our sergeant confronted him. He said that the water and body wash were bad for his fur and that werewolves don't like baths. The sergeant said, "Fine, we will bathe you like a dog then." He told the staff sergeant what was going on and got the go-ahead. At that point, it was either that or paperwork. 6 of us grabbed him out of his rack, dragged him to the showers, poured soap on him, and scrubbed him with deck brushes. The whole time he acted like a dog, howling, barking, growling, and making all kinds of strange noises. When we got home, the gunnery sergeant sent him to mental health for evaluation. It turned out he had some form of identity dysphoria and genuinely believed he was a werewolf. He wasn't in the Marine Corps much longer after that. A few of us think he faked it to try to get sent home early from deployment on medical grounds, then continued it when he realized he could get out of the Corps early with a medical disability related to deployment and collect a check for the rest of his life, which he does. Story 37. It was not until I had read several posts that I remembered grades 5 through 9 and realized you were talking to me. None of the fantasy characters fit me. I decided the reason I could not relate to others was that I was an android. I even tried being Spock for a while, and when the Quester tapes premiered on television, it felt like a better fit. That persona helped me suppress my emotions. Instead of feeling left out and alone, I became an outsider, here to observe but not necessarily to understand humanity. A motorcycle accident at 15 put an end to the fantasy. X-rays and an operation to repair my leg provided undeniable evidence against it. I came up with elaborate explanations, but each was easily demolished by logic. I eventually had to accept that I am biologically human, even if I still do not get people. Story 38. This girl I went to elementary school with was a pathological liar. She believed she was an elf in middle school and wore elf ears to convince everyone. In high school, she claimed she had been struck by lightning. She got a service dog and would sometimes end up in the hospital with serious complications. She suddenly entered very serious relationships and created joint Instagram accounts for them. One day she was planning a wedding. The next day they were broken up. The cycle continued throughout junior and senior year. Story 39. Oh Lord, my time to shine. This is the tale of a dynamic duo. We'll call them Levi and Ryder. Levi somehow got a sales job with me, probably because the only requirement to start was that you could pass a drug test. This kid was almost downright strange. He wore trench coats all the time at work, including a long green, army-looking one. He was eventually told he could not wear the trench coat at work, which everyone found odd. I am pretty sure he walked most of the time. I do not remember him ever having a car. He thought he was some sort of special person, though I have forgotten the details. He did not last long, but he left a lasting impression. He was good at scaring customers away and saying off-the-wall things that would make them run out the door. He also claimed to have fibromyalgia and blamed it for everything. He would stop working and take naps, saying he was disabled and could not stand. I have no idea if this was true, or if he was simply lazy and avoided work. I could be wrong, but it may have been because he was 30 plus and still drinking and smoking like a 22-year-old. Levi also insisted on using a fake last name, something related to Italian royalty. Now here is Ryder. Ryder was not even his given name, to my knowledge. He always dressed in a black cutoff shirt with chains and thought he was some sort of superhero clothing designer. Ryder routinely bought Jeeps, got them repossessed, then showed up with a large amount of cash for a new down payment from unknown sources. Seriously, nobody bought his clothes. We theorized he got the money from his mother because, as far as we knew, he still lived with her. He was in his mid-30s as well. In our small town, Ryder and Levi would show up at parties together in a doorless Jeep, both wearing strange clothes and talking about supernatural happenings and fighting crime. I wish I had more specific details, but this is the tale of a dynamic crime-fighting duo I once knew. I recently checked, and the pair are still alive and kicking. Ryder still looks like he lives in the Matrix or Blade. Levi looks the same as always. Story 40. I used to work in a psychiatric facility with adolescents. We had a girl who acted like a Jedi. Every morning she came out of her room rolling on the ground, shouting that there were stormtroopers, and attacked them with her imaginary lightsaber. She spoke as if she were truly friends with Yoda and Luke Skywalker and had full conversations with them throughout the day. She also caught fairy-like creatures that flew around her and put them in her pocket. When confronted, she argued that whoever disagreed with her was a minion of the dark side and had their mind warped by Darth Vader. This continued daily for about 8 months. She told me that Obi-Wan wanted me to be her Jedi trainer to reach the next level in her Force abilities. After work, I wrote a 20-page manual detailing next steps and activities to help her on her Jedi journey, incorporating reworded parts of her treatment plan. She was there for aggression and running away. Through practicing her Jedi ways, she learned how to cope with her aggression. Part of it was learning that a Jedi need not tell others they are a Jedi. Only the wise with the Force should be able to perceive those with Jedi powers. She eventually told me she knew she was not a Jedi, her first admission ever, but that life was hard, and it was easier to convince herself of this alternate reality than to acknowledge and deal with the pains and disappointments of her real life. Her improvement led to an early release to return home. I do not know how she is doing now, but I wish her nothing but the best. Story 41. Hoo boy, this is one I can actually answer. I knew a girl in high school who was nice. One day, in conversation, she completely believed in werewolves, vampires, ghouls, and the like. I chalked it up to gullibility, felt bad for her, and forgot. Many years later, I heard about her death in the news. After high school, she entered a relationship with a conspiracy-obsessed older man. Together, they planned to start a revolution. They armed themselves, drove out west, killed 2 police officers in a Cici's Pizza, and then entered a Walmart where they killed someone who was about to return fire. They barricaded themselves in the back and committed suicide. Her gullibility and inability to think critically led her to a life that ended in the back of a Walmart. Pay attention in school, kids. Story 42. Yes, unfortunately, because I dated her. We were still at school. I was 16 and she was 15, and she was my first girlfriend. It was around the time Twilight was a huge deal. After seeing each other for about a month, she told me she had multiple personalities. One of them was called Violet, and she claimed to be a vampire. If I had a cut, she would try to lick it. She also gave me a hickey on my neck so bad it turned black and was painful, but she didn't stop because, she said, Violet didn't know when to stop. Not long after, She insisted I was a werewolf because my eyes changed color from hazel to yellow, and she wanted me to scratch her with my wolf claws. Obviously, this was news to me. I'm pretty sure I'm not a werewolf. Why I didn't get out of there at that point, I don't know. She then said she couldn't see ghosts but could talk to them and would have conversations with the ghosts of dead relatives of people we knew. Needless to say, I left, and how that whole experience didn't put me off dating forever, I will never know. Story 43. I went through grade school, junior high, and high school with a guy who imitated a dinosaur daily. If you have seen the movie Step Brothers, there is a scene where Dale's dad, Robert, tells the boys he wants to be a dinosaur. He chases cats and roars at people. I went to school with a boy just like that, named Christopher. Ironically, we were juniors in high school when Step Brothers came out. Chris was actually an honor roll student, not an outcast, and he had a decent number of friends. He would hold his arms like a Tyrannosaurus Rex as he walked through the halls, and I remember seeing him in the lunchroom eat without using his hands to imitate a dinosaur. It was bizarre, but after so long it became normal. I ran into Chris a few years ago at the local movie theater. I still live in my hometown, and he seems to be doing well. He has a wife, 3 kids, and a steady accounting job. Since we did not attend the same screening, I cannot confirm whether he used his hands to eat his popcorn. Story 44. I am currently serving with a man who genuinely believes he is a werewolf. He lived in a 6-foot square cabin deep in Wyoming for years. This man is off his rocker. He howls at the full moon, sleeps under his bed every night, and once scratched a man during an altercation. You're welcome, America, for his service. Story 45. I was friends with a girl who pretended to be a horse when I was a kid. She would neigh and trot around with her hands up like a horse, and she was teased a lot for it. We went to different middle schools, and I eventually saw her again years later in our high school anime club. The club had a bunch of eccentric people, but she seemed pretty normal then. Story 46. When I was in year 3, I thought I was a scion. I was one of the few Asians at my school, and after the episode where Gohan teaches Videl how to fly, I spent weeks trying. I am 27 now, and I still feel like Goku. I am old enough now to know that learning to fly was a metaphor for achieving what you truly want if you believe. Go out and get yours because I am getting mine. Story 47. I know a guy who played vampire live-action role-playing and did other reenactment events. For him, it was just nerdy fun. One freezing winter, he was out doing holiday shopping, and the warmest thing he owned was a big billowy medieval robe made from reclaimed black velvet. He did not mind being the look at that freak guy, but he would not tolerate people messing with him. He was in the local mall, cloak billowing behind him, grumpy because he hated the public and the holidays. A scrawny wannabe goth kid ran up to him, looking absolutely starstruck. Sir, are you a vampire? This was too good to pass up. He seized the kid by the shirt, spun him against the wall and breathed, "Silence, fledgling. We do not break the masquerade." Then he let the kid go and swept away in his majestic cloak. A bit later, he noticed the kid talking to a group of other emo kids, gesticulating wildly. He couldn't resist. He quietly walked up behind them and heard, "A real live vampire is in the mall." All the other kids saw the vampire approaching, wide-eyed. When the kid turned and saw him inches away, looking murderous, he screamed and fled the mall as if hell itself were after him. The mall cop followed my friend for the rest of the time he was there. Story 48. Okay, this is really hard to type. It is the first time I have said anything in a public forum. Only close friends and family knew. Please forgive the formatting. I am on mobile at work. Around 2009, though the exact date is fuzzy, I had a recurring hallucination of a blonde woman following me. I began to listen closely to her when she was not paying attention and discovered she was responsible for getting me ejected from the council. I started to believe I was some kind of powerful ancient being charged with watching over the human race. I spent 3 weeks in the psychiatric ward under 24-hour supervision with daily psychiatric treatment, and I suffered a major psychotic break when faced with reality. Took 2 years and many caring people for me to get better, but thinking about it still hurts. No one knows to this day what caused it. Story 49. When Naruto was really popular, a girl at my junior high walked around on crutches. She hung out with some very nerdy kids but was fine until a phase when she used the crutches. She was in love with Sasuke from the anime. He was supposedly bitten by Orochimaru and had a black mark on his neck that meant he was a vampire, which debilitated him while he recovered. She walked on crutches with a black mark drawn on her neck but had no boot or cast. When our science teacher asked what had caused her to be on crutches, she flipped out because kids were already laughing at her for putting on a show, yelled at him, and stormed out of class with her crutches. Strange times. Story 50. When I was on the psychiatric ward, there was a young woman with severe psychosis who believed she was nobility and that it was only a matter of time before her brother came to get her in his helicopter. It was both amusing and infinitely sad. She improved as her medication took effect, and her real personality began to emerge. There was a young man with dissociative identity disorder. Once I asked what had led him to the ward, he pushed back. We were not close, and you do not develop dissociative identity disorder without cause. His entire demeanor changed, even the way he sat and carried himself. He told me to go away in a different accent, and I obliged. It was strange to befriend both identities. This may not be what you expected. Mental illness can alter your perception of reality, distort memories, and create false ones. Mental health problems, behavioral issues, loneliness, and other factors can make you want to escape into a new form. But mental illness is not escapism. It is losing yourself. Story 51. I went to high school with this kid. He was fairly normal, albeit a bit slow. He was in special education classes not because of learning disabilities but because he had behavioral control issues and believed he was a dragon. He was a great kid but prone to outbursts. His mother sewed him special socks with tassels that would flap when he ran. He ran very fast, and the tassels billowed in the wind. Either his mother was seriously skilled or he ran with grace. I think it was both. They flowed like a daydream. Everyone was supportive of him but did not hold long conversations because he would drone on. I remember stepping in as his bus paraprofessional supervisor one day, and since he lived nearby, I planned to walk home with him after the bus. He asked me to stay for a few minutes to show me something. He brought out papier-mâché dragons. Some were rough. I assumed they were his earliest attempts. Some were magnificent. His father was an engineer, and those were his latest. We talked about them for a bit. I was about to leave, but he asked me to wait a few more minutes for his mother, so he could show me something else. When his mother came home, he set things up in the driveway. It turned out he had been practicing fire eating and had taken up fire dancing, which is what he called it. It was a truly beautiful display. His mother said it was what he wanted to do, so she allowed it with supervision. I can't say enough about him. I'm not sure what happened after high school, but I hope he got to use his talents. Story 52. When I was a teenager, my family owned a small dairy farm. During the summer of my junior year of high school, we had an exceedingly dry season. The well could either feed the barn with our cows or the house, but not both at the same time. My father decided that was unacceptable and brought in an old-timer from the nearby town who had helped other farmers find places to dig wells. The man walked around with two wire coat hangers cut into an L shape that could be held by the short leg. He pointed the long legs away from himself and noted the spots where the coat hangers crossed. I had never seen dowsing at work before, so I asked how it worked. He said that if he walked over an underground stream of running water, his coat hangers would follow the direction of flow. He had mapped out where several branches seemed to meet and showed me the spot. From my perspective, it looked like he was full of nonsense, just tilting his hands and making the hangers swing. He found a spot where the hangers moved reliably and asked me to try. I agreed, knowing it probably would not work. It did. As soon as I stepped over the same spot, the hangers moved on their own. I was shocked. In that moment, I believed that he and I had special powers. My parents both tried, and the coat hangers did not move for them. We dug the well, and there was indeed a lot of water. My dad and the cows were happy. After that, I thought magic was real and became a full believer. When I went to college, I majored in engineering. During my physics classes, I learned about charge and how flowing water can be influenced by charges. I went from feeling magical to being a somewhat poor capacitor. It was a bit of a letdown. Story 53. I lived up the street from a girl who believed she was a vampire and could telekinetically move things with her mind. One day she came out of her room, excitedly telling her mother that she had bent a spoon. She said a friend had shown her how to do it. Her mother told her she had simply bent it with her hand, which made the girl very upset. I could not help but laugh. Story 54. This is probably not a good answer to your question. I met my brother at the pub and one of his friends was there. He said he was a necromancer and assured me it was not fake magic but a real belief system. I asked no questions and have avoided him since. Story 55. Once, when I was in a psychiatric ward after a suicide attempt, I met a young man who believed he had special powers. He thought he could manipulate people's bodies, for example by growing new organs or changing their deoxyribonucleic acid. He was transgender, and one day he decided to transition to female and have a baby. As the months went on, no signs of pregnancy appeared. I thought this would make him realize he did not have such powers, but instead he believed he had miscarried and became very upset. He was a very kind person and regularly tried to cure the other patients by manipulating their genetic material. It did not work at all, of course, but it was a kind gesture. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.